Up in Monteagle, watching one guy try to tow another guy out of a fuel island because they didn't want to wait for the tow truck that showed up literally 3 minutes after this happened. This is why you don't get impatient, but I got a great dash cam video out of it, so hey. Loading a trailer is something that you need to know how to do. Now, for the most part, the customer is going to load it the way he wants. But if they ask you, you need to know, because a lot of times when they ask you, that means you're not going to be able to come back and get it reworked. So you need to have a very good idea what you're dealing with and how to stack pallets. Now, we'll start off with the pallets. Pallets are generally 40 by 48. You can get too wide in a trailer. Crawl up in this dry van and turn the light on here. So what we're dealing with here is a dry van. 102 inches wide, 13.6 on the trailer. Well, it's 30, yeah, it's got no reefer unit and all that. But when you're dealing with here, that's where the deck plate is. And you can put two 40 by 48 pallets this way next to each other instead of straight in. But how you stack them is going to make all the difference on how far back you need to have it and where you're going. California trailers are loaded different than regular trailers because of the bridge laws. But we'll cover that maybe here in a little bit. But it's important to know how many pallets you're getting. So this right here is your standard garden variety 53-foot dry box. Flat floor, it's got wood, it's a real sturdy. They run forklifts over these. No reefer unit back there, and walls here, you can actually tie into these with straps. But you get two pallets on either side, and you can stack them all the way back depending on the size of your load. You'll have to forgive me, there's a little steam coming out because it's 15 degrees outside. So I'm in South Dakota right now. Now, as we go next door and see this refrigerated van, it's really dirty, so don't mind the dirt, it needs to be cleaned. This is your refrigerator. You got the unit up there. You got the grooved floor, and essentially, while it does have the reefer there, it does serve the same function as a dry van. I mean, other than the whole refrigerated part. But the grooves are in the floor for a very real reason, which I'll explain. But it is a lot heavier than a dry van. So that's one of those things that you have to really take into consideration when loading a trailer. That refrigerated unit weighs a lot. So that does come into play, but also the walls being insulated also weighs a lot. So how do you load these? Well, it starts off with knowing the weight of your load. Well, I see somebody had a bad day. So it starts off with understanding how big your pallets are. How much does each pallet weigh? That's going to determine how you stack it in the back of the trailer. If your pallets are only 1,000 pounds a piece, you can double stack them all the way back. If they're 2,200 pounds a piece, you got to do a little more. So that's where you start. How much does each pallet weigh, and how much can you physically carry? Had to find one, but this right here is a standard size pallet, 40 inches by 48 inches. Now, I'm not going to get too far into things like bridge laws and weights and stuff like that, other than maybe setting it up going to California. When you start talking about bridge law tables and formulas and lengths and stuff like that, that could actually be a whole nother video in itself. Just every state is just about this much different. There's a whole lot more states that have bridge laws than just California, and the difference is a lot of them just don't enforce it. So I'm not going to deal too much with that, but we are going to start, with loading the trailer. Now, before I get too far into this, the only thing we're talking about today is 53-foot dry vans and a 53-foot refrigerated van. I'm a big fan of 48-foot trailers. For the mere fact, everybody says 53 foots haul more, but 80,000 pounds is 80,000 pounds regardless. And 90% of the time you look in, there'll be a 40-foot mark and they'll never go past that anyways. Which, they want a 53 foot, but then they never use the last 13 feet. Go figure. But I sitting here, I've been looking for some diagrams to show you on how to load trailers. But essentially, like I said, you have to know how much your load weighs. And that's a good place to start, but you have to know how much each pallet weighs. So if the pallet weighs 2,000 pounds apiece, you need to figure out how to stack it to where your center of gravity is as close to the middle as possible. You want, if you got 17 pallets, do you want the single on the front? You want the single on the end. And this is where it's important to know how much your truck weighs. Now, if you're going to be hauling something like produce and you know, raw things like rice and stuff like that, that you have to get a scale ticket before you load. It's always very important, trust me. Have that truck full of fuel. If you have a refrigerated, have that full of fuel. Put every ounce of weight you can on this truck, because they will load it to the max. If you show up with a quarter tank of fuel, you're just out. So you need to know how much your truck weighs. Certain trucks weigh more. This truck is actually a lot heavier than it looks. I didn't realize that when I bought it. This is just shy of W9 heavy. Not quite that heavy, thankfully. But I do have an extended frame on this truck, and that has made all the difference in the world. So, fully loaded truck and trailer, refrigerated trailer, I'm at 36.5. I can haul 44,000 in here. I don't like it. It turns into a balancing act. But a lot of times that's what it's going to be. And so when it comes to loading the trailer, you have to load it just right. And a lot of times that can be a little temperamental. Got a little shake there. Now, truthfully, with the dry van, I'm about 35, or yeah. I'm a little over 1,000 pounds lighter, which is nice. But, so, how do you load? Well, you need to figure out how much weight you're getting. Now, if you're getting 35,000 pounds, even up to 40,000 pounds, it's really not a big deal. You're getting an odd number of pallets. So if you have like something like a W9, you want the single on the front. If you got something light like a Freightliner, you want the single on the back. Or if you're going out to California, a lot of times you'll put a double, a single, and then double it all the way back, or a double, single, double. It's something that you'll have to experiment with your branded truck, but it's all about knowing where to place the weight on the trailer. Because, like I said, with the bridge laws, California says you have to have 40 feet between the kingpin and the center of the rear axle. And that right there can be kind of tough. That's why you see a lot of these 53-foot spreads in California with slidable spreads. It's ridiculous looking. It's a 53-foot spread in California is almost pointless. That's why I'm such a proponent of a 48-foot spread, because, well, you can load those things any way you want and you'll never be overweight. And you can haul just as much in a 48-foot, you know, like I said, 80,000 is 80,000. Now, I'll tell you this truthfully, there's times you have to pinwheel them in, but receivers don't like dealing with pinwheel loads, but that's a them problem. But back to loading. So here we have a layout of 40 by 48 inch pallets, talking about straightening and turning them, how much room there is to the back. And here we have 40 by 32s. You will run into these from time to time. This isn't, but this is a real thing too, so just be mindful. Now, there are times you will be dealing with floor loads where they don't even put them on pallets, and sometimes they suck. A lot of times, like I used to haul plastic out of Cleveland, or used to haul plastic to Cleveland out of Chicago, the floor loads were, you had to have a dry van to go load up at their, it's Owens Brockway. They're off 51st and Central down there by the Clorox plant that used to be there. You'd have to have a dry van because they had, they didn't have a forklift. They had one of those squeeze machines, and it put plastic bottles in. So they had it configured to where you could get 2 loads just stacked next to each other all the way back with about 3 inches to spare. Because of the walls on the reefer, you couldn't do it. So it was really light load, so that really didn't matter. But it was loaded on the floor. But in a refrigerated van, floor loads are kind of an interesting deal. They either load them all just stacked up on the floor, or they put them on slip sheets. Now, slip sheets kind of take the place of pallets because they are loaded like pallets, but they're what they call slip sheets. And they suck because if you hit the brakes too hard, you can quite literally throw your whole load, and that really sucks. Remember the grooves in the floor, right? That is, back in the day, they used to have flat floored reefers. They were insulated dry vans, more or less, had a wood floor in them, and they were insulated with the reefer unit. They kept things cool, but in the days before pallet exchange, they had to, you had to more or less, what am I saying? You had to own your own pallets. And you had to have pallets in these because you couldn't set the boxes straight on the floor because there was no air flowing under them. And that's what the fins do. They make it so where you can actually load it on the floor and air can still pass under them and keep them cool. Because if no air is passing under it, the only thing you have is the ambient heat from the outside warming up the bottom of the trailer. And trailers are not refrigerators. That's the common misconception. I've said this before. Trailers are designed to maintain something at a temperature. They're not designed to cool things off. You cannot, I can put a 70-degree box in this trailer and 5 days later it'll be 70 degrees. Well, maybe not this time of year, but if you sit there and you try to use a trailer to cool off a hot product, it won't cool off. They're just not designed for that. That's why you have to put things in at temp and they will maintain it beautifully. But enough about that. So yeah, so back to floor loads. Floor loads are kind of a tricky thing. Now if you're hauling like meat combos or something like that, or even boxed meat or boxed product on a slip sheet, they will load just like pallets. But if you're actually hand stacking these boxes in, it's going to be hand stacked from one end to the other with no pallets. And they can't be 5 and 6 high. They have to be, they have to be like 4 high, because it's literally going the whole length of the trailer from wall to wall and all the way back. And 80-pound boxes add up when you stack them 4 high and 45 feet long. Truthfully, in the grand scheme of things, like, if you do a lot of dropping and hooking, your trailers are going to be preloaded. So you have to look at your if they're sealed, you're not going to know what's inside. So you're going to have to look at an air gauge. You're going to have to look at something like that, and that's really going to help you out. And the air gauge on your truck, but you always need to get a CAD scale. But let me see if I can find an air gauge for one of these newer trailers. There's a company out there called Rightway, and they're putting out a lot of neat stuff when it comes to scaling and temperatures, or scaling and air gauges and stuff like that. We got one right here. It's really cool. So this isn't hooked up to any air right here, but this takes the air pressure from the trailer and converts it to thousands of pounds. And it's really cool, and it actually is very accurate. It's 34,000 right here. So pretty much if you're over here, you're in a lot of trouble. But you got to let it air up. It takes a minute or two, and then it's really self-explanatory when you get it. But these are actually really accurate. Now, if you're loading out for the West Coast, like I said, that air gauge is going to be your best friend because you have to set the tandems properly. So you got your kingpin here, and you have to be 40 feet to the center of this axle right here. Now, a lot of companies will have a mark right here. Usually on a lot of these trailers, we have a spray painted mark. You can kind of see it right there. Is that it? And then you just put this hole in the mark that it's supposed to be in. If a trailer comes out to the West Coast a lot, they will have their own system to figure it out, but it's important for you to double check. This right here is a better representation, but if you know the trailer, you can figure out how many holes it needs to be. And on these, that pin needs to be in that hole. Now, this is for our trailers. Your trailer may vary. You know, every brand, they have their own thing going on. So you just kind of have to figure out what's right for you. But the air gauge works. Now, a lot of times, especially going in places with bridge laws, your weight will not be ideal, just as long as it's legal. Running through here is kind of trippy. There have been times I've rolled out of California with 33.9 on the trailer and 28.7 on the truck. Legal's legal. And truthfully, once you get across the border, if you're not happy with it, you can slide it out a little bit. I've done it. We all do it. Make it a little more nicer, just as long as you can make it out. We're not out here to be hassled. And that's where learning how to load a trailer comes in so handy. You just have to figure out where your tandems need to be. You need to figure out where your pallets need to be. And if you notice, I haven't talked a whole lot about physically loading the trailer, and there's a reason for that. It's because every load is different. You're going to have pallets that weigh 1,200 a piece. You're going to have pallets that weigh 4,000 a piece. And that's why it's so important to know your weight. I've had loads where the pallets were so heavy, all we could do was stack them in a single file line. And we can only get 10 on the truck. Yeah, I loaded out of Philadelphia like that one. No, wait, that was New Jersey. Either way, the smell was the same. But you have to have a good idea, because when you're loading in places like Philadelphia and New Jersey, where there's not a ready scale, or it's going to take you an hour and a half to get scaled out, you kind of want to have it right the first time. And this is where experience comes in. And this is where understanding load placement and pallet size and all of this is so very vitally important, because it will make all the difference. And if you get it wrong, it eats up a lot of time. Well, it's been a couple of days, and I wanted to wrap it up the other day, but then I was in Minnesota and it snowed. Then I was in Sioux Falls and it snowed. And now I'm in Kansas and it snowed. It's bitterly cold outside. I did make it home barely. So I guess I'm going to finish this video inside, but I got a teaching aid. Okay, so we have our truck, which happens to be a toy I've had since about 1978. Old Kmart semi. And I got a stack of dimes. These are going to be our pallets. So let me get showing to you what I've been talking about. Now, mind you, this is not to scale. So about all we could get on this little toy here was 20. But it goes all the way to the back door, but we'll just pretend. So these are 2,000 pounds a piece. So you got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. So right here we have 20,000 pounds. So what do we got back here? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. So theoretically, we have 14,000 pounds. Or 40,000 pounds. But there's a catch. You need to know, is that 40,000 pounds of product or a total gross weight of 40,000 pounds? There's a little trick these guys do, and I'm going to show you. Now, I'm not allowed to show you the top half of it because these are old bills, even though this load has expired. But I will cover up all the pertinent details and show you a dirty little trick that you're going to have to watch for in your bills. So I've used leftover dimes to cover up all the pertinent information. Now, you're going to see on your bills, this is your net weight. This is your pallets. However, your pallets here, for 19 pallets, weigh 1,330 pounds, bringing up your gross weight to 41,699. That is why it's so important to go over all your bills in the entirety to make sure that you are looking at the right weight. I've had bills say that I've got 39,000, scaled it out, but there's been 56 pallets in the trailer. They double stack the crap out of them all the way to the door. And I've been at 44.5. Also, sometimes I think they sneak some extra product on their stuff that was cut from orders the day before, and they don't bother telling anybody. Because truthfully, if you can slip 2 extra pallets on 10 trucks, you just haul the truck for free. So, but that's one thing you need to be careful of. Is it your net weight or your gross weight? So now that we've got them all stacked, this is 40,000 pounds. So it says, but truthfully, this is probably a lot heavier. Like, I had 19 pallets on this truck, so let's cut a pallet here, and I was at 41,000 pounds. So let me show you how that looks. So we've got the single at the end, but truthfully, that's not where they're going to put the single on a load like this. The single will be in the front. So they try to compensate for the weight of the reefer. And that's what your load will look like. Now, truth be known, that reefer doesn't weigh nearly as much as they make it out to, but I prefer to let them think the truck and the trailer are a whole lot heavier than they really are because it's better for me. And truthfully, I don't get paid any different on the load, whether it's 3 pounds or 300,000 pounds. They're going to pay me whatever they want to pay me on this load. So quit worrying about mileage, quit worrying about weight, worry about what you're getting paid. But truthfully, if the load's light or if the load's heavy, the rate is a set amount. So that's a whole story for another day. But that's what they're going to do. But you're going to the West Coast, so let me show you what a lot of guys do. On a 40,000 pound load, this is typical. And truthfully, you could get away with that. But if you're got to put it at the California mark, if you're going out to California, typically they move it a little further forward. So what a lot of guys will do is they'll put a double in front, a single, and then double it all the way back, depending if there's a any more singles odd. They always put a little more weight in the front, put the odd man in the middle, and then double it all the way back. And usually, if this was a 53 footer, the load would end right around here. It's kind of what you want. You don't want the load going any further than the 40-foot mark, especially if you're going to California. Because what you really want is to have the load centered. If you got your axles here, you want your load centered between here and between here. It's so much easier to balance if the bulk of the load is in the middle, because you can move it back and forward. So, but like I said before, I've had loads where I've had been 33.9 here and 28 here pulling out. But here's the thing, when you get out of the state, you can move the axles a little back or a little further forward, and it'll make it fine. Truth be known, there's a lot to it. And I've showed you some of the things that I've done and some of the placements that I've done. It's up to you to experiment, but don't go crazy. A lot of these places anymore aren't letting you on the docks, and they're not letting you decide what you're doing. And truthfully, you got to go scale, and then you got to come back and make them fix it if it's too far off. It's just the post-COVID world has given these guys the excuse to kick us out of the buildings, kick us out of the bathrooms, kick us out. I'll tell you what, on a little side note, I was forced to use a porta-john when it's -3 outside. That will change your life. Yeah, I still feel like I left a part of myself in Shakopee. Huh. But as you saw, you know, it's just, you have to figure out the placement. You have to figure out, there's a lot of variables. And that's why a lot of times I tell people that a lot of this stuff is just trial and error. Have an idea. There are a lot of good diagrams online, and a lot of these guys should know how to load it. If you get a load that's, you know, 25, 30,000 pounds, don't even worry about it. Put it where it's supposed to be. If you get a load that's 45, it's very temperamental. You know, like I said, in a single, you know, guys will do a single, a double, and a single, and then double them all the way back if they're heavy pallets and they need the weight centered. If you got heavy pallets but you're only getting, you know, 12 to 15 of them, this might be the way to do it. You just have to figure out, you know, and this is where experience comes in. Now, like I said, in the last several years, I haven't loaded my own trailer. Guys have asked me where I want the single. Usually, I just put it on the back end. Because I don't have, you know, where I'm taking a lot of this stuff, I don't have to worry about bridge laws. So, I just put it on the back end. But that being said, when you go to load your trailer, or you're asked how you want it loaded, be very careful and be discerning about how you do it. A lot of the times I've just asked the guys, well, I mean, how do you normally load it? I just stick it in how you normally load it, and I'll be fine with that. And truthfully, when you tell them that, a lot of times you're good. A lot of these guys, if you go to a lot of the same places over and over again, they're familiar with you, and they're familiar with your loads, and they're familiar with your trucks. And unless you get a real new guy, they'll know how to load it. Well, but I do a lot of dropping hooks, so truthfully, it's sometimes it's a little trial by error there, because my truck's a little heavier than normal trucks. If you noticed, I spent more time talking about the equipment you were using, the size of the pallets, the weights, and then I talked about actually loading the actual truck. And that's because every load is different. But all of these things that I talk about all culminate together to help you make the most informed decision on how to load your truck. Because a lot of times if you tell them how to load it, they'll flat tell you once you leave the facility, you can't come back. And a lot of times if you're hauling some heavy stuff, like I've hauled salt, feed, stuff like that, if they're like, well, we let you cut a pallet, automatically cut a pallet. Like I said, you're not getting paid any less. I automatically cut a pallet out of every load. Because I know that despite that, I'm going to be heavy. And if they give you the option to cut a pallet, always cut a pallet. Just because it gives you that little buffer room, because a lot of these places, like I said, they're either miles from a scale, or once you leave, you're just not, you know, once you sign your bills, they're like, load is loaded, you have to go with it once it's loaded. And to bring it back because it's overweight, you know, you'll be there a day. And you don't want to do that. So, this video was about loading trailers. But it was also more about the fundamentals of loading, not loading the actual physical trailer. Because like I've said, pallets go from, they can be 1,200 pounds. They can be 2,500 pounds. I hauled a load of shingles not too long back to where, you know, it was 4,000 to 5,000 pounds. And they were single stacked all the way back. I wish I could have got a picture of that. It was interesting. But that's just, when you load these things, this is just what you have to do. You have to know. And that's why you need to have all the information you can. Like I said, look at your bills. Look for the pallet count, look for the net weight, and look for the gross weight. There'll be 3 different weights, and chances are all of these weights are not going to be on the same page if you have multiple pages. If you notice, like I said on this, they had the net weight up top where you could see it, but I had to go down to find the gross weight. Campbell's was notorious for that. They'd say you're getting, you know, a net weight, and it would be 42,000 pounds, but after cans and wrapping and pallets and all that, you'd be at 46,000 pounds. And I never did like hauling for them. But all that aside, this was more about the fundamentals and you being able to have the ability to look at a situation and load your trailer properly to make your time more efficient for you. And that's what it's about. The faster you can get your trailer loaded, the less time you can waste loading it, the more time you have to drive, and the more time and the faster you can get that load unloaded. Because truthfully, we're out here to make money. We're out here to turn loads. And especially if you're working percentage like me, the longer you're on a load, the more that load is costing you. You want that load off and done as fast as you can. And sometimes that's what it takes, is having the knowledge and the ability to look at a situation and make it work for you. And that's kind of what this video was about. So I showed you a few things. Hopefully I've given you some tools you can use. And like I said, I really would have rather have finished this out in the truck, but it is freezing out there, and I'm just glad I made it home. So I appreciate it. Thanks for watching. I hope this helps. I appreciate it. We'll see you next video.